First of all, I'm absolutely delighted to be here. I love Essex. I have a real passion for it. And Peter Martin and I sat outside an incredibly cold day outside the House of Commons on a windswept table. And Peter said, come and spend 12 days in Essex and tell me how to fix this small problem of demography, a rising population, less money and fewer people to look after them. So I said, well, that's kind, but actually I'll take a year and a half if you don't mind. So I had 18 blissful months here, going around the county, holding people's juries where I didn't allow anyone from the county council to be present or from any statutory body, and just pulled together people in town halls to talk to them about how they would like to help statutory bodies deliver the care that's needed. Now, I'm responding to the challenge. I'm also, with great respect, you're also slightly late. So what I'm going to do, I think the most important thing is that we finish on time. So I'm going to narrow this down and be sort of bullet point punchy so that you can get to the drinks in 15 minutes' time. The first thing I wanted to say to you is I think we're in a golden age of giving. So that's the good news. As I speak, the news is going to temper a little bit from time to time, but there'll be a crescendo of trumpets at the end. I genuinely think we are moving into a golden age of giving. My bookshelf at the London School of Economics is full of new books. It didn't used to have any in when I first set up the Institute 3 years ago. But now someone publishes a book about giving every 5 minutes. So I've got Give Smart, Philanthrocapitalism, Philanthropreneurship, Philanthropy in Economics, Volunteering and Society in the 21st Century. And that's the last 4 weeks. So there's something going on where you're kind of fashionable. It's a good place to be in this world of giving. We are the world's second most generous nation. Bloody Americans. Any Americans here? Thank goodness. But they are still more generous than us. But after that, there is a huge gap. And of course, in some countries, they don't get it at all. So Scandinavians don't get it about giving because, bluntly, the state is so good. The Japanese cannot understand the concept, and the Germans struggle. And in the Catholic countries of Europe, you give, but it better bloody well be to the church, or else God will get you. So 56% of adults in this country give every month. I mean, that's an amazing statistic. Why pay tax, I always think, when you can give money, but when you give money away, the whole benefit goes to society, rather than just the tax if you spend it on cashmere sweaters and fast cars. So I would suggest you say goodbye to those. But there are a couple of buts. Employers in the room, you're all useless. Only 4% of our workforce give to charity through payroll giving, and only 2% of organisations in this country have a payroll giving scheme. So ask yourself, do we have a payroll giving scheme? Does the Essex Community Foundation have one? Of course it does. Does the local authority? I don't know, and I'm not going to ask its leader, but I don't think it does, actually. And it's probably one of the biggest employers in the county, so shame on you. So I think that there is something to be said about we're not very good, actually, as employers in engaging in our communities in terms of supporting charitable giving and charitable activity. But it is getting better. It does make you a lot happier, doesn't it? I mean, I love giving my money away. I have made a certain amount during my lifetime, and I'm a terrible neighbour. We're going to invade you one day. We're getting our army together, and Suffolk will crush Essex. But I've supported the Suffolk Community Foundation for quite a long time now, and it gives me nothing but pleasure. So for those of you who haven't set up a fund yet, do. You will only enjoy it. And the more you give, the more fun you'll have. And I do like the word fun. I do think giving's fun. You really engage with people. And I was talking to one of your fund holders earlier about a young woman who he's supporting with his fund here, who's now working for a major London law firm. And the smile on your eye, Mr. Starling, I think it was wonderful to behold. Lord Layard, who's one of my fellow profs at the London School of Economics, and is probably the greatest expert in the world on the economics of happiness, says the following: "It makes you happier. The happiness of society increases, the more people care about other people. If we get more happiness from the well-being of others, we shall do more to promote it. This is profoundly important. We should subsidize activities, his words, not mine, that promote community life. So I believe passionately in what Richard said. He's well into his 80s now. Kate, I suspect you know him very well. And he's one of the most remarkable men on the planet, actually. And I encourage you to read his book on happiness. It's very easy to read, and you'll learn a lot from it. But the great thing is, anyone here under 30? Well done, and you too. Because actually you're much nicer than everybody else in this room. My children are way nicer than me. They actually care about society, whereas I really cared about how much Flemings was making on the book, on the trading book, through devious means and others. 78% of young people in London under the age of 35 now give every month. And even more remarkably, 43% volunteer. 43%. I mean, it's an absolutely astonishing statistic. Workers under 35 now actively scrutinize potential employers to see whether or not they will support their giving and volunteering activities. I was very impressed when KPMG arrived to do our most recent audit at one of the organizations I work with. Our auditor told us she was given 2 months off a year, every year, to go to the New Forest and count birds nesting, working for the RSPB, supported by them. I don't know if they were paying her or not, but they certainly allowed her to do it. So here's some more bad news. I'm afraid donors are changing a bit, as you guys know. They want to interfere rather these days, I'm afraid. They have a view, very dangerous, and they sometimes make unhelpful suggestions rather than just trusting you to do your best. And they ask you things like, who have I given to? And you say, I can't really remember. And they say, well, actually, do you know what? That's not good enough. So the climate's changing, and I think of donors now much more as investors. They want to get much more actively involved in what they're doing. They don't often just want to give. They often want to do as well, give their time and their talent as well as their treasure. And they also want to see their money spent quickly. And Caroline and I have talked about this before. It's a bit of a challenge with endowments, but I'm a huge fan of endowments. And when I opened my statement from Suffolk last week and saw after several years of giving, I've still got more than I put in. It's a wonderful feeling, actually. So that's lovely. Now, the other bad news, Chairman of FIC, is I'm afraid they're getting really rather tricky about what you invest in. And to such an extent, ESME is a very large foundation. We have £1 billion of assets. My great-uncle created the unit trust movement in this country, had no children, tragically left none of it to us. Although all our friends think we're frightfully rich and expect us to pay for dinner. But left it all into a foundation in his wife's memory. And we are now in the middle of a major review of our portfolio, really thinking about whether we can afford any longer to invest in oil companies. Can we afford any longer to actually delegate entirely investment management and end up with egg all over our face when the fund manager invests in Wonga, even though it's made us a lot of money? So I think there's a huge challenge coming down the pipeline from your fund holders, particularly the younger ones, when they start asking you difficult questions about what you're investing their money in. So a golden age, a younger generation coming through who want to be much more involved in Essex's future than our generation. And goodness, looking at this room, and I know a number of people in it, you've been amazingly involved. But these guys and girls, I think, will want to do even more, and at a young age. They're going to want to do it in their 20s and 30s. They're not going to wait for their 50s and 60s. I think the 40s will be a permanent write-off. Mortgages and families do take over, but I think we are seeing a huge sway of demand for volunteering roles from people in their teens and 20s now. It's really exciting, actually. However, we have a little bit of a problem. The state is shrinking, and it's shrinking very, very fast. And that is an apolitical statement. But maybe it's a good thing that it does. Because when Beveridge, in 1942, in this month, exactly 75 years ago, began work on his great piece of work, which led to the founding of the welfare state, he said the following, and this is engraved on my heart. any piece of work I've ever done, I've always written this down at the beginning. The state, in organizing security, should not stifle incentive, opportunity, or responsibility. In establishing a national minimum, it should leave room and encouragement for voluntary action by each individual to provide more than that minimum for himself and for his family. And somewhere between 1942 and 1990, we just lost that. There's a wonderful quote from Gordon Brown, which I reminded him of when he was our glorious Prime Minister. Marie Curie was his favourite charity, so I dared remind him of it, where he castigated charity in 1988 in the House of Commons as being a terrible example of how the state could be failing if it had to use charity. Of course, as soon as he was Prime Minister, he changed his tune and said how wonderful charities were. But somehow in the 80s, the 70s and the 80s, we just lost the plot, and we increasingly became dependent on the state. And unfortunately, many of our larger charities lost the plot too. And my greatest fear is for our really big, loved charities, like the Red Cross, like Leonard Cheshire, like MenCap, who have become so dependent on state funding now that I regard them actually as departments of state. And some of these are more than 90% funded by government now. And of course, as the councils have been hit, they've been hit too. And true voluntarism has been undermined. But that's a great opportunity for community foundations. At the LSE, we've just been doing some work with an American organization called Edelman. And for the last 18 years, Edelman have monitored in America and in Europe trust, levels of trust in organizations. And they've published recently, and we had a sort of seminar with a number of foundations a couple of weeks ago where they were taking us through it. And basically, trust in organizations has never been lower, ever. Trust in government is at absolute low point, both in America and in Europe, including this country. But worryingly, trust in what we normally call non-governmental organizations, NGOs, into which fall these very large charities, is declining very rapidly. And people are particularly not trusting of charities that give money overseas. I don't think it's a sort of Brexity thing. I think it's just you read too much in the papers about what happens. 45% of all medical equipment given to Africa has never been used, as an example. My prediction is this will be a golden age for community foundations. Because in America what's happening now is there's much more money going into local giving. And the really big boys, like Gates, like Zuckerberg, are actually finding they become better respected by their own communities if they invest in their own communities, and not in opera houses, please, but actually in what Beveridge called the five giants, which I can never remember, but basically it's poverty. He unfortunately used one of them was idleness, which I don't think one could use nowadays, but there we are. So I think a golden age for community foundations, because I think people are going to want to give and do locally. And that brings me on to my final point. In 2013, I almost said 1913, in 2013, September, this document was published, Who Will Care? And a number of us here, John Aldridge, John Spence, Peter Martin, there are probably others in the room, were intrinsically involved in this commission that I led. I reread it yesterday. Do you know what? It's bloody good, actually. I'd forgotten. But while we were writing it, a number of things happened. Every single chief executive of every hospital in the county disappeared. Jo Killian handed in her resignation, running the council. The leader of the council departed. Kind of Southend and Essex fell out a little bit. And I was left trying to navigate my way around the county for a year and a half, with my bosses changing about every 5 minutes. Essex then went into a tailspin in healthcare and became one of the two, how can I put this politely, because we're on camera, aren't we? One of the most challenged health systems in England. And they're now called the two success regimes. of Devon and Essex, where there was the most interference in healthcare. But you're right, John. Actually, nothing has changed since you and I wrote this report in Essex, in terms of the problems are still the same. And I'm afraid that some of the things we told you were going to happen have now happened. And you've done precious little about it. And I've tried to think about why that was. And I think it was partly that it was a time of immense change, and partly that the health system collapsed, frankly, in the county, right in the middle of this. So engaging was very, very difficult. But I think I made two big mistakes, which I've never forgiven myself for. One was a belief that it would happen without an obvious leader. And I should have said to Peter, I'll do it, but I should stay on for a year afterwards to make sure it happens. And I didn't do that. So that was the first mistake. And the second was, and please don't take this the wrong way, but I remember it was just as the health and wellbeing boards were created. And I took this report into the Health and Wellbeing Board, a packed room of 30 people from all the way across the county who were going to take it on. And at that moment, my heart hit my feet, and I knew it would never happen. Because something like this doesn't happen without singular leadership. And the second, and the other mistake I made in that, and there's a challenge coming, which is the blazing trumpets, was to burden, in a way, the local authority, the council, with the role of leadership, which they probably never wanted. They were right to commission it. But actually, this was about voluntarism. This was about the county as a whole coming together. And probably none of you read it, very sensible if you didn't, but I'll just conclude by telling you what the three core recommendations were that were relevant, and then hand over my trumpet. No, play it. The first was to agree a new understanding between the public sector and the people of Essex. To be honest with the people of Essex and say, you can't have everything. Beveridge set a national minimum, and that is what we, the public sector, are going to provide. And the rest of it, we have to support each other to make it happen. So that was the first, and we gave lots of ideas about how that could be done. The second was preventing unnecessary crises in care. And the great news is I hear that the village agents movement is going really well. And I'm thrilled about that. I think there were only 8 when I was doing this work. And I think they've changed names and they're now the community agents. I thought it was the most brilliant idea. And I thought there should be something like 600 across the county of these individuals doing a fantastic job for people. Google it, find out more about it. I don't have time to tell you about it tonight. The third was to mobilize community resources. And I knew from the town hall meetings I did that the community wanted to be mobilized, but nobody was mobilizing them. And that was where the leadership was missing. They were longing to help. Do you know the people of Southend voted, 150 of them, to close Colchester Hospital and to their local hospital, because they said there's no point in it, because Chelmsford's half an hour away and Ipswich is 40 minutes away. So why do we need Colchester as well? Let's reinvest it in community services and we'll tell you how to do it. I tried to get hold of the local MP, he didn't answer my call. Actually, quite interestingly, John and I tried to engage with the 12 Essex MPs during this 18 months, and we never got one MP, to come and talk to us about what they thought would be important. So there's something about mobilizing the community. And then the fifth one is about leadership, and that's where I'm going to come to my trumpet. I'm awfully impressed by the chief executive of this community foundation. I think she's absolutely extraordinary. And she smiles, she's tough, she's tall like me, which is definitely a plus. And we got chatting in Cardiff, where I was being quite tough with the community foundations. I was asked to go and talk to all the community foundations. And she said, could you be slightly nicer when you come to Essex? So, A, I hope I have been, but B, let me say to you, and I've told this to the newly appointed cabinet leader for health and social care, and I've warned him, and I've also, I think, warned the leader of the council too. sorry, the chairman of the council in advance, that I think the council should think about asking the Essex Community Foundation to become more of a doer as well as a funder, and to get this report out and lead for the whole county on putting some of this into practice. Because if you don't, the elderly population of this county is stuffed. Thank you very much.